I woke up to the sound of my neighbor screaming. Not just any neighbor, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood. She stood at the edge of my property, her face redder than a fire hydrant, shrieking like a banshee. But that wasn't even the best part. Her brand new luxury SUV was trapped, marooned in the middle of a massive trench. I'd legally dug around my driveway, a trench now equipped with a fully functional, medieval-style drawbridge I could raise and lower at will. My name's Jake. A year ago, I was just a regular homeowner, a guy who'd moved to Sunnyvale Estates after a messy divorce, hoping for peace and a fresh start with my 10-year-old daughter, Emily. I pictured quiet weekends grilling steaks, maybe teaching Emily to ride her bike without training wheels. But peace was a pipe dream with Karen as HOA president. She ruled the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom, measuring grass with a ruler, fining folks for the wrong shade of beige on their shutters, sending nasty letters if your car had a speck of dirt. I'd tangled with her petty nonsense before, but I never imagined it'd escalate to all-out war. It all kicked off one crisp Saturday morning. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the day, when I spotted Karen's oversized SUV parked smack across my driveway. At first, I figured it was a mistake, maybe she'd pulled in for a quick stop. But then I saw her on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that smug grin she saved for when she was about to ruin someone's day. Emily peeked out from behind me, her brow furrowed. "Morning, Karen," I said, keeping my tone civil. "Your car's blocking my driveway." She smirked like a cat eyeing a cornered mouse. "Oh, I know," she said, her voice syrupy. "It's HOA business. We've had complaints about your driveway." I blinked. "Complaints? From who?" "That's confidential," she replied, waving a dismissive hand. "But we've decided it doesn't meet HOA standards." I glanced at my driveway, a plain, unremarkable concrete slab. "That's ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with it." "Well," Karen said, inspecting her manicured nails, "the HOA board has the final say. Until we review it, my vehicle stays here to prevent further infractions." Emily tugged my sleeve. "Dad, can she do that?" I wanted to snap, but I knew Karen fed off drama. "You're joking," I said instead. "Nope," she chirped, pulling out a clipboard and jotting something down. "Oh, and if you tow my car, that's harassment. HOA rules." I took a deep breath, nodded, and ushered Emily back inside, her small hand gripping mine. The next few days were torture. Every morning, Karen's SUV sat there, a smug monument to her power. The HOA ignored my calls, and a tow company refused to touch it, citing some community agreement. Karen strutted around like she owned my property, while fines started piling up, penalties for neglecting driveway maintenance since I couldn't use it. One evening, Emily found me staring at a stack of HOA letters. "Dad, why's she so mean?" she asked, her voice soft. I hugged her tight. "Some people just crave control, Em, but we're not backing down." That night, I turned to research. If Karen could twist HOA rules, I'd find my own loophole. After hours of digging, I struck gold. A local ordinance allowing temporary security modifications on private property. A trench and drawbridge weren't permanent, totally legal. My lawyer buddy confirmed it. Game on. The next day, I rented an excavator and hired a crew. Emily watched, wide-eyed, as they carved a 4-foot deep trench around the driveway, trapping Karen's SUV. "It's like a moat, Dad," she exclaimed. "Exactly," I said, grinning. Our neighbor Tom, a retired accountant fed up with Karen's reign, stopped by. "She fined me for my bird feeder, once said it wasn't too colorful." "You're a legend, Jake," I chuckled. "She's gone too far this time." By dusk, the trench was done. Karen stormed over the next morning, her smugness evaporating when she saw her stranded car. "What the hell is this?" she screeched. "Security modifications," I said, smirking. "HOA rules allow it?" Her eye twitched. "You can't dig a hole around my car." "Sure I can. It's my property and you wouldn't move." I handed her the permit. City approved. Her jaw tightened. "You'll regret this," she spat, stomping off. She wasn't kidding. The next day, she banged on my door. "Fill in that trench, or I'll bury you in fines." I sipped my coffee. "It's legal, Karen." "You've got 24 hours, she snapped. "Actually," I said, "I'm building a drawbridge next." Her jaw dropped. "A drawbridge? You're insane." "Nope, just resourceful." I hired a contractor, Dave, who geeked out over the medieval vibe. Rain slowed us down, turning the trench to mud, but Emily pitched in, hauling tarps and cheering me on. We finished a sturdy drawbridge with a crank. Karen lost it. "You can't have a fortress here." "It's a security feature," I said. "HOA encourages those." That night, I caught her on camera sneaking around with scissors, eyeing the ropes. "Lose something?" I called. She bolted, nearly tumbling into the trench. The feud escalated. Fines poured in, unsightly structure. Noise complaints, but I had the upper hand. With Tom's help, I uncovered Karen's corruption, siphoned HOA funds, fake fines. At a tense meeting, she gloated about my violations, but I slid a folder across the table. "Let's talk about your fraud," I said. Her smirk vanished as the board ousted her. Later, her house sold cheap, and she slunk away. The neighborhood bloomed barbecues, laughter, peace. Emily and I tested the drawbridge one evening, her giggles echoing. "We won, Dad." I hugged her. "Yeah, Em, we did." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of furious banging on my front door. I already knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. Karen was standing there, looking like she had spent the night plotting my destruction. Her face was red, her fists clenched, and the moment I opened the door, she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You need to fill that hole in right now," she screeched. I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the way her eye twitched at my lack of urgency. "Oh, you mean the trench? Sorry, can't do that. It's a legal security measure." Karen let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a screech. "You have exactly 24 hours to fix this, or I will make sure the HOA fines you into oblivion." I pretended to think about it. That's interesting because I was about to make some more improvements." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of improvements?" I grinned. "A drawbridge." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. She looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. "You can't just put a drawbridge in a suburban neighborhood." "Sure I can. I already checked the regulations. As long as it's a temporary structure and not a permanent gate, I can build it. And since you're so concerned about my driveway, this will help keep it protected." Karen looked like she wanted to throw something at me, but instead she stormed off, muttering threats about city inspectors, lawsuits, and how I was going to regret this. I had no doubt she was going to do everything in her power to shut me down, but I wasn't worried. I had done my homework, and for once I was actually looking forward to this battle. I spent the next few days gathering materials and hiring a few skilled contractors. The best part was that I didn't even need anything fancy, just some reinforced wood, strong metal hinges, and a pulley system to make it work. I made sure to record every step of the process, not just for proof that I was following regulations, but because I had a feeling this was going to be internet gold. As construction continued, Karen escalated. She called in city inspectors, who came by expecting to shut me down, but left shaking their heads when they saw that everything was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a petition with the other homeowners, but most of them were just as sick of her as I was. She even went as far as trying to block my contractors from entering the neighborhood, but that backfired when one of them turned out to be the brother of a city councilman. By the time the drawbridge was fully installed, the whole neighborhood was watching. It was a thing of beauty, a sturdy wooden platform controlled by a simple pulley system that allowed me to raise and lower it whenever I pleased. I gave it a test run, pulling the rope and watching with satisfaction as the bridge lifted, leaving my driveway completely inaccessible. Karen, of course, lost her mind. "This is insane. You can't have a medieval fortress in the middle of the neighborhood," she screamed. "It's not a fortress, it's a security feature," I said. For protecting my property. HOA rules encourage security improvements." She let out a strangled noise and stomped away. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Later that night, I was woken up by the sound of rustling outside. I peeked through my blinds and saw Karen creeping around the edge of my trench with a flashlight. She was inspecting the drawbridge, probably looking for a way to sabotage it. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "Looking for something, Karen?" I called out. She whirled around, nearly losing her balance. "I was just making sure this ridiculous thing isn't a hazard." "You mean trespassing?" I said, "because that's what it looks like to me." She scowled but quickly composed herself. "I'm on the HOA board. I have the right to inspect potential violations." "That's funny because last time I checked, the HOA doesn't own my property," I said. "But don't worry, I'll be sending this video to my lawyer and maybe even posting it online. I'm sure the internet would love to see the HOA president sneaking around private property in the middle of the night." Her face drained of color, and without another word, she turned and hurried back to her house. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread about Karen's midnight snooping, and people were starting to turn against her. She tried to spin it, claiming she was just doing her job, but no one was buying it. Meanwhile, my story was gaining traction online. The video of the trench and drawbridge had gone viral, with thousands of comments praising me for standing up to HOA tyranny. Karen must have realized she was losing ground because she switched tactics. If she couldn't beat me with rules, she was going to make my life miserable in other ways. The fines kept coming, ridiculous ones like unauthorized modifications to property and creating an unsightly structure. She even convinced a few of her remaining HOA loyalists to file noise complaints, despite the fact that construction had already ended. But I was ready for her. I had been quietly gathering evidence of her abuse of power, including records of her misusing HOA funds for personal expenses. It wasn't hard to find, turns out. She wasn't nearly as careful with paperwork as she was with enforcing her petty rules. I compiled everything into a neat little folder, ready to strike when the time was right. The final showdown came during an emergency HOA meeting that Karen had called to discuss my so-called violations. The moment I walked in, I could tell she thought she had won. She sat at the head of the table with a smug smile, ready to deliver her verdict. "We've decided that your modifications are in violation of the community standards," she announced. "You'll need to remove them immediately, or you will be facing legal action." I smiled, pulling out my folder and placing it on the table. "That's interesting because I've found some violations of my own," she frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and started listing her misdeeds, fraudulent fines, misuse of HOA funds, intimidation tactics against homeowners. The more I read, the paler she got. "You're lying," she hissed. "I have proof," I said, "and I'm willing to take this to the authorities." Silence filled the room. The other board members, most of whom had been too scared to stand up to her before, suddenly looked very interested in what I had to say. Within minutes, Karen was voted out as HOA president. By the end of the week, an investigation into her shady dealings had begun. That night, I stood on my driveway, sipping a cold drink as I watched Karen's SUV finally being towed away not by me, but by the authorities. My trench and drawbridge had started as a joke, but in the end, they had been the perfect way to expose her corruption. And the best part, my driveway had never looked better. With Karen gone, Sunnyvale Estates exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Neighbors began to shed the fear of her iron rule, decorating their yards with wild flowers and whimsical sculptures that would have once earned a fine. The Drawbridge, now a local legend, drew curious visitors, some bearing cookies, others just eager to hear the tale. One weekend, kids begged for a demo, and as I raised the bridge, their cheers sparked an impromptu block party, complete with music and shared stories of Karen's reign. A newcomer, Lisa, joined the festivities, her skeptical grin softening as neighbors recounted my triumph. "You're the Drawbridge guy?" she asked, impressed. I shrugged, but the pride was hard to hide. Soon the new HOA, led by a sensible architect named Jen, invited me to consult on community projects, a mural here, a shared gazebo there, turning our suburb into a place of collaboration. But peace was fleeting. Word trickled in that Karen, undeterred, was rallying old allies for a comeback, whispering at town hall about restoring order. This time, though, I had an army of neighbors ready to fight back, united by the bridge that had set us free. After Karen's dramatic arrest for trespassing and property damage, caught on my security footage cutting the ropes to my drawbridge, the neighborhood buzzed with a mix of disbelief and triumph. Her petty revenge had backfired spectacularly. The police hauled her off as she screamed about being the victim, but the evidence was undeniable. The next day, gossip spread like wildfire. She'd been terrorizing residents for years, yet no one had dared confront her until I did. The HOA board, already on shaky ground, called an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to strip her of her presidency. But that was just the beginning. A few days later, an investigator emailed me about her financial misdeeds, sparked by the files I'd presented at the HOA meeting. I handed over everything, records of wrongful fines, shady transactions, and soon the investigation ballooned into a full-blown fraud case. Karen had been skimming HOA funds for personal luxuries and offshore accounts, a scam artist hiding behind her title. When the news hit, neighbors lost their minds, hanging free at last banners and openly mocking her. Her house lingered on the market before selling at a loss, and the day she moved out, I watched from my driveway, raising my coffee cup in a silent toast as her truck vanished down the street. With Karen gone, the HOA crumbled, most members resigned, and in a historic vote, we dissolved it entirely. Sunnyvale Estates felt liberated. No more absurd rules or fines, just freedom. My trench and drawbridge turned me into a local legend, dubbed Castle Jake by the kids, and the story went viral. News outlets called it a brilliant act of defiance, and fan mail poured in from across the globe. I repaired the drawbridge, adding a plaque that read, "In memory of HOA tyranny," which became a quirky landmark. But freedom brought new challenges. Without the HOA, minor disputes flared. Mr. Thompson's dog barked all night, and Mrs. Garcia painted her house a blinding yellow, irking the neighbors. Some grumbled about needing structure, so I called a meeting at my place. "We've seen how power corrupts," I said, "but we can't just ignore these issues." After debate, we formed a voluntary council, no enforcement, just mediation. It worked. A chat convinced Mr. Thompson to quiet his dog, and Miss S. Garcia toned down her paint job. The council fostered a new community spirit, balancing liberty with cooperation. One evening, as I grilled steaks by the drawbridge, now a block party hub, old Mr. Henderson stopped by. "I knew someone would topple her," he chuckled. "But a drawbridge? Genius." I grinned, flipping a steak. "This place is better now." He nodded. "Thanks to you, Jake." For the first time, it truly felt like home. Karen was quiet for a few days after the HOA meeting, which was unsettling in itself. She wasn't the type to surrender easily, and I could sense she was plotting her next move. The neighborhood was still abuzz from her downfall. People treated me like a hero, waving as I walked by, giving thumbs ups, or asking to see the drawbridge in action. Even the mailman chuckled about it during his rounds. But I wasn't naive. Karen's silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. Sure enough, trouble brewed. It began subtly. An anonymous tip to the city about unpermitted construction led to a zoning official's visit. He inspected my drawbridge, smirked, and left after confirming everything was legal. Then came a wave of fake complaints from concerned neighbors, reports of late-night noises, suspicious activity, and claims that my trench endangered the neighborhood's stability. I knew Karen was orchestrating it, but with no concrete evidence, I could only grit my teeth and endure her petty harassment. Then she escalated. One night, a loud crash jolted me awake. Heart racing, I bolted to the window, flipped on the outdoor lights, and saw the damage. My drawbridge lay crumpled in the trench, its ropes severed, planks splintered from the fall. I checked my security cameras, and there she was, Karen, dressed in black like a bargain bin spy, wielding bolt cutters. She'd trespassed into my yard and sabotaged it herself. Without a second thought, I dialed the police. They arrived quickly, but Karen had already retreated to her house. The footage, however, was undeniable. Officers knocked on her door, and after a tense standoff, she emerged, shrieking that she was the victim, that my drawbridge was a public menace. The cops didn't buy her theatrics. She was cuffed and charged with trespassing and property damage. Watching her get hauled into the squad car was a victory sweeter than I'd imagined. The next day, the neighborhood erupted in chatter. Karen had terrorized people for years, but fear had kept them silent. Now, with her exposed, neighbors confessed they'd longed to resist, but dreaded her wrath. Her public disgrace forced the HOA board's hand. They voted unanimously to oust her, stripping away her last shred of authority. But the saga didn't end there. Soon after, an email landed in my inbox from an HOA fraud investigator. Karen's financial schemes had piqued their interest, and they wanted the evidence I'd presented at the meeting. I handed over the goods, every unjust fine, every dubious transaction. Within days, it ballooned into a criminal case. Karen wasn't just a bully. She'd been embezzling HOA dues for years, funneling cash into vacations, designer goods, and an offshore account. When the story hit, the neighborhood went wild. Free at last signs sprouted on lawns, and Karen's house went up for sale. It languished on the market. No one wanted the tyrant's lair until she sold at a loss and fled. As her moving truck rolled out, I stood on my driveway, raising my coffee mug in a mock salute. She glared, powerless, and I smiled. She was gone. With Karen out, the HOA imploded. Board members quit, and a neighborhood vote dissolved it entirely. People reveled in the freedom. No more absurd rules or fines, no more walking on eggshells. I became a local icon. The Drawbridge tale spread beyond Sunnyvale Estates. News outlets dubbed it a brilliant act of defiance. My videos went viral, and fan mail poured in from folks battling their own HOA woes. Kids nicknamed my place Castle Jake, and I fixed the drawbridge, adding a plaque in memory of HOA tyranny. One evening, grilling steaks, an old-timer neighbor stopped by. I knew someone would topple her, he said, gazing at the sunset. But a trench and drawbridge? Genius. I laughed. Desperate times, creative measures. He nodded. This place is better for it. I agreed, finally feeling at home. But liberation brought new hurdles. Without the HOA, small conflicts flared. Mr. Peterson's rooster crowed at dawn, irking half the street, and the Wilsons built a towering gazebo that blocked sunlight for their neighbors. Some grumbled, nostalgic for structure. I reflected on what I'd learned. Unchecked power corrupted, but chaos wasn't ideal either. So, I proposed a casual town hall by the drawbridge. We've seen tyranny, I told the crowd, but we can't ignore issues. We debated. Some wanted rules, others prized freedom. A compromise emerged, a voluntary neighborhood watch. No authority, just mediation. It clicked. A chat with Mr. Peterson got the rooster relocated, and the Wilsons downsized their gazebo after a block vote. Cooperation replaced coercion. The shift rippled outward. I started a blog, Drawbridge Diaries, chronicling our saga and offering tips on community resilience. It gained traction, connecting me with others who toppled petty tyrants. One letter stood out from a woman in Ohio facing her own Karen. We swapped strategies and she later wrote back, triumphant. That sparked an idea, a network for neighborhood rebels. Meanwhile, Sunnyvale thrived. We hosted a fall festival, the Drawbridge a quirky centerpiece, with kids racing across it and vendors hawking crafts. As I manned the grill, a new family approached recent buyers of Karen's old house. Heard you're the guy who freed this place, the dad said. I grinned. Team effort. His daughter tugged my sleeve. Can we see the castle? I lowered the bridge and they cheered. Looking back, taking down Karen changed me. I'd been a loner, annoyed by meddling neighbors. Now I was invested organizing events, mediating spats, even mentoring that Ohio woman. The drawbridge wasn't just a gimmick. It symbolized standing up, yes, but also building something better. One night, under a starlit sky, I sat by the trench, sipping coffee. The neighborhood hummed with life, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. We'd traded a dictator's grip for a community's heart. And that, I thought, was the real victory.